The summer before my senior year of high school, my parents moved from Waconia to Mankato. I was really happy about this because it meant I did not have to keep going to the same high school I was attending. I had had big aspirations to be a star on the basketball court, but I was just getting a couple minutes of playing time off the bench every game. I had had a girlfriend who was very pretty and very nice, but she was more interested in another guy who was nicer and prettier than me. I was ready to be done with high school. So I moved to Mankato with my parents, and I took classes at Minnesota State Mankato. I had a friend that I'd grown up with in the Carver County area, and he was a student at Gustavus. So while I took my coursework at Mankato State, I did all my socializing at Gustavus. And my friend was a couple years older than me. He was actually a senior at Gustavus. And he lived in an off-campus house with all his friends. And all his friends were the most intelligent and thoughtful and curious people. I would just sit there with them and laugh and listen and participate too. And it felt so good to make this transition. Forget high school. I was hanging out with seniors in college who saw me as their peer. I think they saw me as their peer. One time they asked me if I would like to go to a concert with them all the way in Madison, Wisconsin. Sure, yes, I'd love to, I said. And then they asked me if we could borrow my parents' minivan to get there. That would be fine, I said. So we all piled into the minivan. We made the 5.5-hour drive to Madison, Wisconsin, and it was a ton of fun. Conversation with these people was always great. You could have spent all day in a van, laughing, listening. Great time. 5.5 hours to Madison. We get there a little bit early, so we walk up and down State Street. It's a great city, great town. Stop, have some pizza. That's fun, too. Get into the show. Opening act. All right, come on. Finally, the main event. They come on stage. They rip through their album. It takes 40 minutes, and that's it. Show's over. And we all thought, that's it? Now we have to get in a car and drive 5.5 hours back to St. Peter? I mean, the drive was fun. Madison is cool. The pizza was pretty good. But it was not worth 11 hours of driving. The foolishness of youth, we all thought. So today, here's where we're at in Jesus' ministry. A couple weeks ago, we celebrated Christmas. And then Jesus goes dark for about 30 years. We don't hear much from him. And then John the Baptist starts preaching out in the wilderness, pointing to one who is going to come after him, who will be stronger than him. The one whose sandals he is not even worthy to untie. That's Jesus. Jesus comes to John and asks to be baptized. John would have prevented it, but Jesus says it is necessary in order to fulfill all righteousness. So John baptizes Jesus. That was 2 weeks ago. And then after the baptism, Jesus goes out into the wilderness to be tempted. That was last week. And then John is arrested and imprisoned. And Jesus returns from the wilderness and takes over John's pulpit, so to speak. Jesus starts preaching the baptism of repentance that John had been preaching. At least, eventually he does. Right after Jesus returns from the wilderness and takes over John's pulpit, he doesn't really do that much preaching that we hear about, at least. The first thing he does is call a few disciples. Follow me, he says. And these people would not have known anything about Jesus, and yet they still follow him for some reason. Perhaps they had nothing better to do. And after this, Matthew writes that Jesus moves into the synagogues and begins curing every disease and every sickness among the people. And because of all these healings, Jesus' fame spreads throughout Syria. Everybody hears about Jesus, and they bring everyone who is afflicted with any illness to Jesus to be cured. The demoniacs, the paralytics, the epileptics, maybe those people who are addicted to their smartphones. Everybody comes to Jesus and is healed. But at this point, at the beginning in Matthew's gospel, Most of the buzz around Jesus has to do with the feats that he has been performing as a miracle worker. Up until this point, Jesus hasn't really preached yet. The anticipation is great, but he hasn't had that inaugural sermon. He hasn't released that TED Talk that everybody's going to watch and then talk about afterward. But the anticipation is great. And today is Jesus' first recorded sermon. It's like all of the Old Testament and the 4 first chapters of Matthew, the first 30 years of Jesus' life. It's like that we've all been in a minivan together, riding for hours, days, months, years, decades, millennia, waiting for this moment. And the minivan pulls up to a mountain, and we all climb up that mountain, and we are ready for the moment. And Jesus steps forward in front of the microphone. He clears his throat. He's got a sense of the dramatic, and he begins to speak. Blessed, he says, or happy. Happy. Happy are the poor in spirit. Happy are those who mourn. Happy are the meek. Happy are those who hunger. Happy are the pure in heart. Happy are the merciful. Happy are the peacemakers. Happy are you when people revile you. And this sermon keeps going, but it's not sounding very good. Happy are the poor. Happy are the mournful. Happy are the meek. Happy are the hungry. Jesus' first listeners would have been so acquainted with grief and deprivation, they would not have known much about happiness. And maybe they'd have thought, what are you saying? We were waiting for this? We drove 11 hours for this? This is it? And maybe on that mountain, the person there with their recording equipment, the director of those TED Talks who was at that mountain to get this first sermon so that it could be distributed and viewed by everyone, I think she would have been a little bit disappointed with Jesus' words too. This person knows how sermons or talks are supposed to go. She knows what people share and listen to and hold on to. Jesus, she said, I can see what you're trying to do, but I think your message needs a little bit more meat. I'm wondering if you know any scientific studies that could demonstrate how when people are experiencing grief and deprivation, how what they're actually experiencing is happiness. And Jesus would have shaken his head and said, no, I'm not aware of any such studies. Well then, can you think of a little anecdote, a cute little story, maybe some cultural artifact that could show a group of people who have experienced grief and deprivation, and how they learned they weren't actually experiencing grief and deprivation. What they were experiencing was happiness. And again, Jesus would have shaken his head and said, I don't think there are any cases where people are going through hell and are just confused. And the director shrugs again. Okay, well then, Sermon on the Mount, Beatitudes, take 2. Happy are the poor in spirit. Happy are the mournful. Happy are the meek. Happy are those who hunger. Cut. Jesus, this is not going to work. No one is going to watch this. And I think it's true. Here are the Beatitudes, stuck right in the middle of our Gospels. The inaugural address from Jesus, the great wisdom that we have been waiting for, but they're absurd. They make no sense. We read them and we kind of just need to jump over them or wave at them or move past them before we find other wisdom or sermons or talks that are wiser, truer, easier to share. I think the problem with the Beatitudes is that they make no sense, and they're not true. The states of being Jesus describes this morning are not happy states of being. They're not fortunate. They're not blessed. But maybe the misunderstanding all started when that director brought her recording equipment up to that mountain with the belief that she could just record Jesus' sermon on that afternoon and then share it with other people. And the experience of hearing it secondhand or third hand or fourth hand would be as powerful as being there. You can do that with a great sermon, I think. You can do that with a good article or a TED Talk. But you can't do that with the Beatitudes. They need to be experienced in person. The problem is when we clip them out, pass them along, and disappear ourselves. The problem is when we separate the message of these Beatitudes from the in-person experience of one person sharing them with another person. Say you were walking along and noticed a scrap of paper on the ground in front of you, and you picked it up and read the words, "I love you." Interesting maybe, amusing, but ultimately meaningless. Those words are utterly anonymous. They weren't meant for you. You don't know who wrote them. They're just there, just words on a page. But say you meet someone or get to know someone who looks deep into you, who takes an interest in you, who touches your body and your imagination, who reveals possibilities for life that you'd never imagined. And say that person looks at you and says, "I love you." Those are not just words on a page. That's not just a sound in the air. Those words change reality. Or say you've made a colossal mistake. Once again, you've made so many mistakes before, but never one quite this big. You've dug yourself into a hole that you have no business getting out of. And the person whom you have wronged comes to you. And you deserve any punishment or condemnation or desertion that would be coming your way. But instead, this person says, "I forgive you. I love you." Those aren't words on a page. That's not just a sound in the air. Those words change reality. Or say you are poor, mournful, meek, hungry, reviled. You have nothing. You find yourself gathered on the side of a mountain with a bunch of people in the same position in life as you are. There is no indication that your circumstances in life are going to change anytime. All you have are the people on that hill with you. And one of them says to you, "Blessed are you. Fortunate are you. Happy are you. I love you." Those aren't just words on a page. That's not just a sound in the air. Those words change reality. I still drive a minivan 20 years later. It's a different minivan, but it is from 2004, which was the same year that I drove to Madison for that concert. I was filling this minivan up with gas a week or so ago. And now at gas stations, while you're filling up, they have these TVs that are like built into the pumps. So you don't even need to look at your smartphone or think or meditate or pray. You can just watch TV. So I was watching TV, and on the screen in front of me, a beautiful woman appeared. Her makeup was perfectly applied. She was standing in a sleek, modern kitchen that was spotless. She had not a wrinkle on her face. Her teeth were so big and white. Her smile from ear to ear. And she started giving me life advice. And I thought, this is great. I'm going to get my car filled up with gas, and this lady's going to write Sunday's sermon for me, too. So she told me, every morning when I wake up, I need to walk in front of the mirror and give myself a high five. She said I need to do this because when you give a high five, your body is trained to feel good, to release dopamine. And your body doesn't even know it if you're high-fiving yourself. So you can trick your body into feeling good by giving yourself a high five in the mirror every morning when you wake up. Now, I have to confess to you, I don't take preaching that I hear at the gas station very seriously. But still, I thought, if giving yourself a high five in the mirror is supposed to be good, imagine how good it would be to be with another person. Maybe at church, maybe at the social hall, maybe at the grocery store, maybe lying in bed together. And this person will look at you square in the face and say, I love you. I think that would feel good. I think that would make me happy. Amen.